This question is a hypothesis test or a significance test about proportions. And I know that it's about proportions because the question, although it doesn't say proportion, the question is working with percentages. So the proportion that we care about is the proportion of graduate students that are looking for housing on campus. So, and this is the important phrase here. The housing office thinks the percentage of graduate students that are looking for housing on campus may be more than 10%. So I know that my alternative hypothesis is that the proportion looking for housing, I call that P sub H, is greater than 10%. That's what we're looking for evidence of. That means my null hypothesis is that proportion is 10%. So in terms of the conditions here, I have a random sample of graduate students. So the question actually says that we took a random sample. So you should note that. So in terms of independence, 10 times the 481 is 4,810. And that's plausible to be less than or equal to the number of graduate students at this large university. Again, the question says that we're working with a large university. So then the normality condition, that 481 times your null hypothesis value of 0.1, and the 481 times the 1 minus the null hypothesis value, that will be 0.9. It's important here in the condition to use the null hypothesis value because remember, the p-value assumes that the null hypothesis is true. So we're using that null hypothesis value to actually check our normality condition. And in both cases, if you calculate that, 48.1, 432.9, they're both easily greater than or equal to 10. So our approximately normal sampling distribution for our p-hats, that's been verified. So now it's just a matter of finding the z-score and the p-value and interpreting what we get. So this test is a one proportion z-test. So our null hypothesis value then is 0.1. So if you go back and look at the question, 62 out of the 481 respondents said they were looking for campus housing on campus. So I'll take my success count of 62, and n is 481. It's the number of respondents. So again, I'm looking for a greater than alternative. The direction of that alternative value that comes from the alternative hypothesis. And there we go. Our z-score is about 2.11 and our p-value is 0.017. So now we're ready to interpret our result in context. So three things: compare the p-value to a significance level. I know the question didn't state a level of significance, so you choose one when you write your conclusion. So after you make that comparison, you either do or you do not reject the null hypothesis. And then after that, you write about whether you do or do not have evidence of the alternative. So with our p-value of 0.017, which is less than 0.05, that's the level of significance I chose here. That's very standard. I would encourage you to use that if one is not specified. We can reject the null hypothesis. So we do have evidence that, so in context, the proportion of graduate students looking for housing on campus really is greater than 0.1. So just a small detail then from this question, if you go back and look at the way the question is phrased, it says, on the basis of the survey data, would you recommend that the housing office consider increasing the amount of housing on campus that's available to students? So you want to make sure that you answer this question. So we've done this. It says give appropriate evidence to support your recommendation, but we haven't actually made the recommendation yet. So something to think about. We have evidence that more than 10% of students, graduate students, are looking for on-campus housing, so we should actually then make our recommendation. Based on this evidence, one should recommend that the housing office consider increasing the amount of housing on campus available to graduate students.